It was Lunar New Year's Eve. I was 52 years old, hunched over a kitchen counter covered in fish blood and silvery scales, my fingers locked stiff from hours of scraping fish skins nonstop since 5 a. And the family matriarch, my mother-in-law Zhang Xiuying, stormed in without a single word of thanks for the 16 dishes I'd promised to prep for the holiday feast. Her voice sliced through the steam rising off boiling broth, sharp and ungrateful. Suaping, run upstairs and grab a pack of my blood pressure pills right now. My head's pounding. I held a 4-pound grass carp in both hands, knife pressed into its flesh, every inch of my skin slick with fish slime. Mom, I'm mid-prep on the main fish dish. The pill bottle's in the second nightstand drawer. Your knees ache bad from climbing stairs, but you can make it 2 flights alone for 5 minutes. Her face turned purple instantly. She didn't bother debating logic, just snatched my stainless steel thermal mug full of hot herbal water off the counter and slammed it against the tile sink with all her strength. Ceramic exploded across the floor, scalding liquid splattering my bare ankles, shards skittering around my rubber work shoes. You useless thing. You'd let me collapse from hypertension just to mess with the fish? Zhang Disheng, get in here this instant and see what wife you married. Footsteps thundered down the hallway 2 seconds later. My husband Disheng, a middle school history teacher with a condescending, polished tone he reserved for everyone but me, burst through the kitchen door first, followed by my 30-year-old son Haoyu, phone still blaring short video comedy audio from his pocket. Neither glanced at my burned ankles, the pile of unfinished ingredients, or the 16 partially completed dishes behind me. Disheng's gaze zeroed straight on my mother-in-law, his voice dripping with reprimand before I could utter a single word in my defense. What is wrong with you, Suaping? Mom's joints are shot, and you refuse to fetch her medication? Have you lost all basic decency? Haoyu nodded in full agreement, scrolling mindlessly on his phone screen without lifting his eyes to meet mine. Seriously, Mom, can you not pick a fight on New Year's Eve? Aunt Wang's wife from our neighborhood works full-time and still handles all family meals without throwing fits. You always look frumpy and worn out. I'm embarrassed to introduce you to my coworkers. That line landed heavier than the shattered mug crashing to the floor. 30 years of cooking every meal, washing every piece of laundry, scrubbing every surface, tending to every family member's minor and major ailments collapsed in that single sentence. I stared at the broken ceramic scattered at my feet, the grass carp still twitching in my grasp, and let out a quiet, hollow laugh no one expected. For 30 years I'd lived as this household's unpaid, unacknowledged domestic appliance, no salary, no social circle, barely enough pocket change to buy cheap grocery staples. Today, the invisible rope tying me to this family finally frayed apart completely. My name is Li Suaping. I married Zhang Disheng at 22, a rural girl with only a primary school education, matched to him through a village matchmaker. Back then, Disheng had briefly defended me against his mother's sneering judgment about my lack of formal schooling, claiming my domestic skill made me the perfect partner for a teacher with a busy schedule. That tiny glimmer of kindness faded within 3 years of marriage, the moment our son Haoyu was born. Disheng's entire worldview revolved around intellectual status and public respect. My lack of education made me a source of quiet shame he never hesitated to take out on me privately. My mother-in-law Xiuying, a retired accounting clerk from a textile factory, carried lifelong class bias against uneducated rural women. She firmly believed daughters-in-law existed solely to absorb all household labor without a word of complaint. Her 2 biological daughters, Mei Fong and Mylin, were labeled guests whenever they visited the home, forbidden to step foot in the kitchen while I was confined to cooking, cleaning, and elder care 365 days a year. Their double standard was unspoken, yet ruthlessly enforced for 3 full decades. Haoyu grew up absorbing every insult they hurled at me. From elementary school onward, he heard Disheng grumble about my incompetence and Xiuying mock my frumpy clothing and inability to assist with his homework. By his teenage years, he openly refused to let me attend parent-teacher conferences, embarrassed by my worn cotton jackets and lack of modern cell phones. His core motive for treating me coldly was simple. He'd learned from the 2 most important men and women in his life that catering to his comfort came before my dignity, and there would never be consequences for dismissing my feelings. I'd endured endless tiny humiliations over the years, each stacking weight onto my shoulders until the New Year's Eve mug incident broke me entirely. Our family all demanded separate noodle varieties for every meal. Disheng only ate alkaline wheat noodles, Haoyu craved fine vermicelli, and Xiuying required thick hand-rolled wide strips. 3 separate pots had to boil simultaneously every breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Once I'd rushed through morning chores and cooked 1 batch of mixed noodles to save time, Disheng slammed his chopsticks down hard enough to crack his ceramic bowl and spent 20 minutes berating me for being careless and stupid. After that incident, I'd voluntarily retreated to eat alone in the kitchen every single night, never invited to sit at the main dining table with the 3 of them. They'd chat about history textbooks, corporate design work, and factory pension plans, tossing around academic jargon I couldn't follow, and if I dared glance at their newspaper spread, Disheng would snort and tell me not to waste my time on text I'd never comprehend anyway. I owned 0 personal income. Disheng doled out a fixed monthly grocery allowance with 0 extra cash for toiletries, medicine, or new clothing. Over 6 years of pinching every cent from food funds, I'd scraped together exactly 8,000 yuan in cash, hidden deep inside my old fabric bag from my birth family, the only personal asset I possessed on the entire planet. That evening after the mug shattered, I retreated back to the kitchen to finish prep work while the 3 of them sat in the living room bad-mouthing my attitude. Midway through chopping garlic, I dug out an old cloth sack tucked deep inside a wooden storage crate beneath the counter, leftover belongings my late mother had left me before passing away decades prior. Inside sat a yellowed handwritten recipe notebook, a tarnished copper hairpin she'd worn all her life, and a crumpled folded slip of paper I'd never fully read until that New Year's Eve. My mother's handwriting was faded, smudged with cooking oil stains from years of use. Sweeping, if life ever boxes you into a corner where no one values your hands or your heart, remember cooking is your survival skill. A woman with solid craft will never starve alone, no matter who abandons you. This was the first critical hidden layer I'd uncovered, the quiet seed planted years prior that fueled my later decision to walk out that night. My mother had been the village's premier banquet chef, catering every wedding and funeral feast for miles around, celebrated by every neighbor for her recipes. After marrying into the Zhang household, I'd suppressed every single one of her cooking techniques, deliberately toning down the rich, flavorful dishes she taught me to avoid Xiao Ying's endless complaints that my food was country-style and tacky. For 30 years, I'd hidden my greatest talent to appease a woman who'd never once appreciated a single meal I prepared for her. I traced the copper hairpin's curved surface with my thumb, fish scales still clinging to my fingertips, and realized the entire 30 years of sacrifice had been completely one-sided. I poured my heart into every meal, every load of laundry, every dose of medicine I prepared for Xiao Ying, and received zero gratitude in exchange, only constant criticism, public humiliation, and being treated as invisible labor. The front door chimed an hour later. My eldest sister-in-law Mei Fong arrived with her husband Lu Jiangwo and their 3 children. She stepped into the kitchen without a greeting, wrinkling her nose at the fishy odor covering my apron and sleeves, physically stepping backward to avoid my body entirely. Gosh, that stench is overwhelming. Don't stand too close to me. I just bought a new silk coat for the holiday. Before I could reply, she glanced over the rows of prepped ingredients and scoffed loud enough for every person in the living room to hear. Only 16 dishes. We've got 5 extra guests tonight. That's nowhere near enough food. Last year, her braised pork was so salty my whole family couldn't eat a bite. I told Mom we should just order restaurant takeout instead of relying on her terrible cooking. Her husband Jiangwo followed behind, carrying a foam cooler full of rock-hard frozen king crab and salmon fillets, dropping the heavy box onto my counter without a single offer to assist with thawing or prep work. Handle all the seafood for dinner. Make sure it's ready fast. Everyone's starving waiting to eat. I stared at the frozen block that required 2 to 3 hours of full thaw time. Stacked beside 18 separate dishes, I was solely responsible for producing single-handedly from 5 a.m. until evening, with zero family member offering to peel vegetables or stir broth for even 5 minutes. Every person in that house would demand perfect food without lifting a finger to help, then nitpick every flaw once the meal hit the table. Xiao Ying wandered back into the kitchen 10 minutes later to lecture me about apologizing to her in front of all relatives that night. You owe me a public apology at the dinner table for your rude behavior earlier. If you refuse, everyone will think I mistreat you, and that's humiliating for our entire family name. I gripped my wok spat tight enough my knuckles whitened, responding flatly for the first time in 30 years. I have nothing to apologize for. I was mid-prep with slippery fish covering both hands when you threw the mug at me. I didn't disrespect you at all. Xiao Ying's face turned scarlet, spinning around to march back to the living room and summoned Dishing immediately to discipline me. He stormed back into the kitchen, jaw tight with fury, blocking my path to the stove. Apologize tonight, or you're not allowed to join the dinner table at all. You'll eat in the kitchen alone again, like always. A bitter laugh escaped my throat, sharp and unfiltered. When have I ever sat at the main table with all of you these past 30 years? That spot's never been mine to begin with. Dishim waved off my retort as meaningless whining, ordering me to finish all dishes by 5:30 sharp or face, more scolding once the guests finished arriving. How you wandered in shortly after, grabbing an ice-cold cola from the refrigerator, leaning against the metal frame, and delivering another cutting remark about my stubborn personality. Just say a quick sorry to Grandma to keep the peace, Mom. If you keep fighting like this, I won't be able to bring my new girlfriend over for dinner in 3 days. She'll think our family's chaotic and unreasonable. That line was the final breaking point. All my labor, all my suppressed hurt, 30 years of unacknowledged sacrifice existed only to serve as dating prospects and the family's shallow public image. None of them cared one single bit about my pain, my exhaustion, or the unfair treatment I endured every single day. I didn't bother replying to Haoyu's comment, silently returning to chopping vegetables while every word from the living room's gossip session drifted through thin drywall, each sentence a fresh stab to my chest. By 5:30 p.m., all 18 dishes were fully plated and carried to the main dining table one by one. I stood against the kitchen wall watching the entire family crowd around the table, passing plates, pouring wine, laughing loudly without sparing a single glance my way. Mylin, the younger sister-in-law, briefly offered to come help me clean up later, only to be shut down instantly by Mei Fong, who reminded her guests shouldn't labor in the kitchen. Halfway through the feast, Haoyu casually gestured toward an empty chair beside him and told me I could sit down for a minute to eat. I pulled out a wooden stool and settled into the tiny empty spot, the first time I'd sat at the main table in 3 decades, only to realize his kindness was transactional, not genuine. On the 3rd day of Lunar New Year, I'm bringing my female coworker over to meet everyone. You need to cook an elaborate spread to impress her. Don't make the food look cheap. Xiao Ying immediately lit up at the mention of Haoyu's potential girlfriend, completely ignoring the decades of unfair treatment that had unfolded just hours prior, only focusing on me producing flawless meals to win over a stranger. I set my rice bowl down on the table, completely losing my appetite in an instant. All the exhaustion, humiliation, and invisible servitude of 30 years crashed over me in one brutal wave. Once dinner wrapped and every guest departed to lounge in the living room, I silently cleared every single plate, bowl, and utensil alone, scrubbing 40-plus pieces of tableware by hand in cold tap water for nearly an hour straight. On my way to toss out garbage bags filled with food scraps, I overheard Mei Fong gossiping to Xiao Ying about me, claiming I'd acted wildly disrespectful that evening and that Dishing had made a terrible choice marrying me all those years ago. I froze mid-step holding a dripping trash sack, listening to my husband's mother confirm Dishing privately admitted marrying me was the biggest regret of his entire life. Every single wound I'd buried deep resurfaced all at once. I returned to our shared bedroom, dragged 2 worn suitcases out from beneath the wardrobe, and began packing my minimal belongings, a handful of dark faded shirts, the 8,000 yuan cash wrapped in cloth, my mother's recipe notebook, and the slightly bent copper hairpin. I also bagged every raw meat, fish, and vegetable I purchased at dawn that morning, all bought with my scraped-together grocery money, all prepared solely by my 2 hands. I dragged both heavy suitcases out into the center of the living room where the entire family sat chatting on the couch, cutting off their conversation cold with a single quiet, unshakable declaration that set up the Chapter 2 massive plot twist. Once Civil Affairs bureaus open after the Lunar New Year holiday, I'm filing for a divorce with you, Dishing. Are you insane? Where do you think you're running off to? This house needs someone to cook, clean, tend to my meals. Without you, who's going to run everything? Her fingers dug hard into the worn fabric of my jacket, nails digging into my forearm, desperate to pin me in place like I've been pinned for 30 years. Disheng stood up slow, his expression hard, that patronizing teacher glare he reserved just for me locking onto my frame. He didn't bother asking why I'd reached this breaking point, only issued a cold ultimatum, like grading a failing student's essay. You speak without thinking in a fit of temper, don't you? Step outside that front door tonight, and don't ever come crawling back begging for shelter. You've got no education, no phone skills, no steady income. Without this family, you're nothing at all. How you stood beside his father, arms crossed tight over his chest, judgment etched all over his young face. Mom, quit throwing childish tantrums. This New Year's celebration's ruined for everyone because of your nonsense. Can't you just swallow your pride and stay home? We'll pretend this never happened, and you can go back to handling chores like normal. Mei Fong and Lu Jiangwo exchanged smug glances on the sofa, Mei Fong's lips curling into a dismissive sneer. I told Mom ages ago this woman had a wild temper hidden under that quiet act. 30 years of free labor, and she still finds a reason to throw a fit over a mug and a few harsh words. No one asked what I'd endured, and O1 acknowledged 18 backbreaking dishes prepped alone since dawn, and O1 mentioned the shattered mug and scalded water burning my ankles. All they cared about was losing their permanent, unpaid maid. That's when the second major plot twist hit me. They viewed my 30 years of round-the-clock labor as a disposable convenience, not a lifetime of sacrifice worthy of even basic gratitude. I didn't yank my arm free from Xiaoying's grip right away. I scanned the solid wooden dining table pushed against the far wall, the surface still covered in leftover fish bones, half-eaten pork ribs, empty wine glasses, and crumpled napkins from the feast I'd single-handedly created. Every scratch on that table told a story of me eating cold scraps alone in the kitchen while they laughed and dined comfortably up front. I planted both feet firm, released the suitcase handles for a split second, and stepped forward until my shoulders pressed against the table edge. Xiaoying still clung to my sleeve, yelling threats about me abandoning my own blood family. I leaned my full weight against the wood frame, then shoved forward with every ounce of strength my aching, overworked body could muster. A deafening crash ripped through the room. The heavy table toppled sideways, every ceramic bowl, porcelain plate, wine cup, and leftover dish crashing to the marble floor, shattering into hundreds of jagged fragments. Frozen king crab I'd thawed for hours rolled across the carpet, raw fish sliding under the coffee table, broth soaking into the fabric cushions. Mei Fong screamed and clutched her young child tight against her chest. Xiaoying stumbled backward, releasing my arm in shock, mouth hanging open wide enough to fit a fist. Disheng froze mid-step toward me, all his harsh words dying in his throat. Haoyu's confident sneer vanished completely, his face draining pale as paper. Look what this ungrateful woman's done. 30 years we fed and housed her, and she destroys our whole dining set over a tiny argument. Disheng finally snapped out of his stunned stupor and advanced on me, voice raised loud enough to shake the window panes. You've lost every last shred of reason. This is why everyone says you're reckless and unfit to run a household. If you walk out this door now, you get 0 share of our house, 0 of our savings. Everything belongs to me and Ha. That threat wasn't new. For decades, he repeated the same line whenever I dared disagree with him, drilling into my head that my lack of a formal paycheck meant I owned nothing in this marriage, not even the roof over my head. Back then, I believed him, trapped by my own self-doubt planted by constant belittlement. But today my mother's handwritten recipe note echoed in my mind. Skill equals survival, and my skill belonged solely to me, no matter what this man claimed. Haoyu stepped between Disheng and me, attempting to act like a reasonable mediator, though every word still carried that same dismissive bias toward my feelings. Mom, calm down and fix this mess. The table can be replaced, the seafood can be thrown out. Just apologize to Grandma and Dad, and we can sweep this under the rug before all the relatives hear the commotion outside. I locked eyes with him, flat and unyielding. Apologize for what? For spending 17 straight hours cooking 18 dishes for every single one of you? For getting scalded when your mom smashed a mug at my feet? For 30 years eating cold leftovers in a kitchen corner while you sat front and center at every holiday table? Haoyu shifted his gaze away, unable to meet my stare. He knew every word I spoke was true, but his comfort and social standing with his co-workers always came before acknowledging my suffering. That was his core motive. He'd grown accustomed to the effortless care I provided and refused to sacrifice any convenience just to validate my pain. Mei Fong cut into our argument again, crossing her arms judgmentally. Even if you're upset, there's no need to destroy property. You're middle-aged, acting like a spoiled teen throwing tantrums. You'll never make it out there alone with no income stream. I glanced down at my 2 packed suitcases, my thumb brushing the outline of my mother's cloth bag tucked inside the side pocket, and uncovered a secret I'd never shared with any of them, the hidden savings of 8,000 yuan scraped from decades of tiny grocery budget scraps. I do have assets you know nothing about. 8,000 cash I saved without a single cent from Dishing's wallet, plus every recipe my mother left behind. Her banquet cooking skills aren't something any of you ever valued, but strangers will pay good money for meals crafted the way she taught me. Every face in the room shifted at that revelation. None of them had ever considered I might hold a marketable skill because they'd spent 30 years writing me off as useless and talentless. This was the second small reversal. They'd fully written me off as destitute and helpless, unaware I'd quietly built my own safety net long before the New Year's Eve meltdown. Dishung scoffed harshly to mask his momentary unease. Home cooking doesn't count as a real job. You'll barely scrape together enough cash for cheap hostel rooms, let alone rent an apartment. I didn't waste breath arguing with him then. I lifted my suitcase handles once more and turned toward the front door, rain spattering against the window glass outside the house, cold winter wind whistling through the thin window cracks. Showing sprinted to block the doorway, arms spread wide to physically bar my exit. You cannot leave tonight. It's Lunar New Year. What will everyone in the village gossip about us if you run off on holiday? Her motive laid bare entirely. She cared zero about my safety or well-being, only the village's whispers damaging her family's perfect public image. I stepped around her outstretched arms without breaking stride, dragging both heavy suitcases over the cold concrete front step, rain immediately soaking through my thin cotton coat. I walked for 20 minutes, my shoes filling with cold rainwater, muscles screaming from a full day of standing and chopping. I kept walking toward the main county highway, clinging to the hope a passing vehicle might stop to offer a ride, even as every part of my body ached with exhaustion and quiet grief. 30 years of my life had been poured into that house, and in a single evening I'd lost every family tie I'd clung to for so long. I'd spent years convincing myself if I just endured a little longer, someone would finally say thank you. Now I understood that gratitude would never come from any of them. Just as my legs threatened to give out beneath me, a faint glow of white headlights rounded the distant highway bend, growing brighter with every second. I stepped to the side of the road, lifting a hand weakly to wave, not holding out much hope drivers would stop for a stranger wandering alone on New Year's Eve rain. The vehicle slowed steadily and pulled over beside me, a beat-up white delivery van rolling to a complete halt. The window rolled down halfway, a round-faced woman with a fabric headband tying back her hair leaning out to squint through the rain at my soaked frame. Her voice loud and warm, cutting through the cold wind. "Hey lady, what are you doing wandering out here in this pouring rain on New Year's Eve? Where are you headed?" I blinked hard, wiping rainwater from my eyes to recognize her face after a beat. Zhao Fengxia, the woman I'd shared a small street food stall with over a decade ago back when we both sold produce at the town morning market. Back then, she ran a tofu stand, and I'd stepped in to watch her stall anytime she needed to run errands, our casual friendly bond buried under 30 years of my family's demands until this moment. "Fengxia, I'm trying to get into the county downtown area. I don't have anywhere to stay tonight." My voice cracked, rain mixing with silent tears I couldn't hold back any longer. Without a single second of hesitation, she pushed open the van's side door and jumped out into the rain to grab my suitcases from my hands, hauling them into the dry backseat storage area. "Get in the passenger seat right now. Don't stand out here freezing half to death. All hotels in town are fully booked for the holiday. My little restaurant's back room has a spare storage nook I can clear out for you to crash tonight, no charge." This was the chapter's massive third plot twist. The only person willing to extend genuine kindness to me on my worst night wasn't blood family, but an old casual acquaintance I'd long forgotten about, someone who'd never once looked down on my lack of education or dismissed my cooking skills as worthless. I climbed into the warm van cabin, Fengxia tossing a thick dry towel into my lap to wipe rain from my hair and face. She cranked up the car heater and merged back onto the highway, glancing over at me every few seconds with quiet concern, no pushy demands for every ugly detail of my family fight. "Whatever happened to land you out here alone tonight? You don't have to spill everything if you don't want to. I'm not here to poke around in your business. But you're safe with me for the night. That's all that matters right now." For 30 years, my blood relatives had hounded me for explanations, screamed accusations, and punished me for every minor perceived mistake. A near stranger offered shelter without judgment, and that simple contrast split my heart wide open. I curled my fingers tight around the cloth bag, holding my mother's copper hairpin, silent tears soaking the dry towel Fengxia had given me as the van rumbled toward the county streets. 30 minutes later, we pulled up outside a small two-story storefront marked Fengxia's Kitchen with faded red paint on the wooden sign. The restaurant was closed for the holiday, all dining tables empty, the back kitchen dark and quiet except for a single gas pilot light glowing soft orange. Fengxia unlocked the rear service door and led me through the kitchen to a tiny partition storage room tucked beside the walk-in pantry, dragging out a thin cotton mattress from a closet and laying it across the concrete floor. Not fancy by any means, but it's dry and warm, no rain leaking through the walls. "I'll grab you a hot bowl of noodles right quick. You've been out in the cold for hours. You must be starving." I sat down on the mattress while she hurried to light the stove, water boiling in a metal pot within minutes. She cracked 2 eggs into the broth, tossed in fresh tomatoes and chopped green onions, sliding a steaming ceramic bowl across the counter to me 10 minutes later. I picked up the chopsticks and took the first bite, warm broth sliding down my cold throat, and the tears I'd been holding back spilled freely onto the table surface. For 30 years, I'd cooked hundreds of bowls of noodles for my husband, son, and mother-in-law, tailoring every recipe to their specific picky tastes, yet not one of them had ever once made me a single warm meal after a grueling day of labor. This stranger, barely an old friend, had dropped everything to shelter and feed me without a single expectation of repayment. Fengxia leaned against the counter beside me, letting me cry without rushing to offer empty, comforting words, just waiting patiently until I'd wiped my eyes and set the bowl down empty. "I've been running this spot alone for years. Business is steady, but I can barely keep up with lunch and dinner rushes single-handed. I've been hunting for someone who knows how to prep ingredients and man the wok properly for months. All the part-timers I've hired burn every dish or cut produce unevenly." She paused, watching me trace the edge of my mother's recipe notebook peeking out of my suitcase pocket. You used to help me back at the market stall. I remember how quick and neat you were chopping vegetables even back then. If you're stuck without work right now, I can offer you a live-in helper position. Room's this storage space you're sleeping in, $3,000 a month cash, full meals every shift. My breath caught in my chest. For 30 years, I'd been told my cooking was worthless, fit only for cheap home meals no one appreciated. Now someone was offering steady paid work built entirely around my cooking skill, the talent my mother had spent years teaching me that my own family had spent decades dismissing as country garbage. This fourth subtle reversal planted the seed of my brand new independent life. I nodded without hesitation, voice still shaky from crying. I'll take the job. I know every kind of stew, braised meat, and fish recipe my mom taught me. I can handle every prep shift alone. Feng Xia grinned wide, clapping me lightly on the shoulder. That's fantastic news. We'll start proper shifts the 5th day of the Lunar New Year once the holiday breaks over. Get a full night's rest first. No rushing tomorrow. I laid back on the thin mattress after she left me to rest, twisting the slightly bent copper hairpin between my fingers, staring up at the dim overhead light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Outside the restaurant windows, distant fireworks bloomed across the night sky, marking the start of a new year for every family in the county. Only my new year didn't start with a crowded dining table full of people who took me for granted. It started in a tiny back storage room with a hot bowl of noodles and a genuine offer of work that belonged entirely to me. I'd walked out of 30 years of unpaid servitude with nothing but a few old clothes, 8,000 yuan savings, and my mother's recipes. But for the first time since I was 22 years old, I didn't feel scared of what came next. Tomorrow morning, I'd wake up with no one ordering me around. No list of 18 mandatory dishes to prep for ungrateful relatives. Tomorrow belonged solely to me.